To watch the Gene Kranz interview in its entirety, visit our website, cspan.org/history.
50 years after the moon landing, Apollo 11 astronaut Michael Collins, National Air and Space Museum Director Ellen Stofan, and former NASA Administrator Charles Bolden reflect on the Apollo program's legacy and its impact on today's politics, diplomacy, foreign policy, and space initiatives. Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, the State Department, and the George Washington University Space Policy Institute co-hosted this event.
Oh, welcome. It is truly a thrill to see space diplomacy, a topic near and dear to me, draw such a wonderful crowd. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Teasel Muir-Harmony. I'm a historian of science and technology and a curator at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum for the Apollo Spacecraft collection. 50 years ago this week, the Apollo 11 crew fulfilled President Kennedy's call to land humans on the moon within a decade and return them safely back to Earth. And I hope you've been celebrating all week. A greater percentage of Earth's population followed their flight than any previous event in human history. After their flight, the astronauts toured over 20 countries on every continent. President Nixon proclaimed them the best possible ambassadors America could have on this Earth. So today we're looking back and asking what was the political and foreign relations significance of the Apollo program and what is its enduring legacy. And we're also going to look forward, questioning how Apollo-era space diplomacy should inform foreign relations today. So very shortly, I'll be giving you some historical context on the role of Project Apollo in U.S. foreign relations. And then this will be followed by a one-on-one conversation between me and Major General Michael Collins. And then we'll have a larger panel discussion that looks at Apollo and then also how it can inform the future of space diplomacy. But first, I would like to say thank you for coming to recognize some special guests we have here today. The Collins family and friends, thank you for joining us. And I would like to now introduce you to George Washington University President Thomas LeBlanc.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Muir-Harmony, for your introduction, and of course, for your significant contributions and ongoing commitment to space history. I'm pleased to welcome you all to the George Washington University's Lisner Auditorium and to join you for this event celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing. I would especially like to thank our co-sponsors, the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum and the U.S. State Department, and this evening's distinguished panelists, Major General Collins, Dr. Stofan, and Major General Bolden, for your participation. It is an honor for us to hear from you this evening. I would also like to recognize GW's Venerable John Logsdon, Professor Emeritus of Political Science and International Affairs at our Elliott School of International Affairs and founder of the GW Space Policy Institute. Founded in 1987, the Institute's research and integration into a robust academic program is one of our university's most significant contributions to the space field. A world leader in research, graduate study, and informed discussion related to issues of science, technology, and public policy, the Institute has developed generations of students, scholars, and professionals engaged in space-related work in government, industry, and academia. Its interdisciplinary students and faculty bring deep experience in space policy, law, economics, and history. They are internationally known and respected for their expertise in space policy, history, law, and economics, and they routinely consult with industry, international organizations, and of course, our own government. We value these partnerships and the contributions we can make together, understanding our history, providing research and expertise on current developments, and continuing to prepare future leaders who can help advance our efforts in space well into the future. Please enjoy this evening's discussion. Thank you.
Next, Undersecretary for Economic Growth, Energy, and Environment from the U.S. State Department, Keith Kruk, will say a few words. Thank you.
It's a great honor and privilege for us to be here representing not only the United States, but the men of peace of all nations with interest, curiosity, and a vision for the future. These were the few words that the late Neil Armstrong told the President of the United States as he walked on the moon 50 years ago. So as we celebrate this golden anniversary of Apollo 11, I humbly stand here today in the same building, and you'll soon see, with Michael Collins, one of the men of Apollo 11. And he is an inspiration to us all. As a matter of fact, he was an assistant secretary at the State Department, and it's great to know we have that never-ending bond, that never-ending connection that you see with the dedicated team of the great diplomatic corps at the State Department. I also have something in common with Neil Armstrong. We're both Ohio boys, and we went off to Purdue to study engineering. Now, I didn't become an astronaut or play one on TV, but I can tell you that space is personal for me. And ever since I was that little 12-year-old boy, you know, sitting in the living room with my mom and my dad and the two sisters with our one TV, looking at those black and white snowy images and watching that Neil Armstrong, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, I just developed a love affair with space. And I've had three really great points of personal connection. The first was my roommate at Purdue, one of my roommates in the fraternity house, he ended up going in the shuttle 4 times. He ended up being an astronaut. His name was Greg Harbaugh, and I'll never forget. He'd come in, you know, late at night, maybe I was at a party, and he was sitting down at a drawing board. You know, we just switched over from slide rulers to calculators. And I go, why are you studying so hard, Greg? He goes, well, I want to be an astronaut. I go, you can't be an astronaut. I go, all the astronauts are military, so you just can't. He goes, if you dream hard enough and you work hard enough, you can make it come true. And I saw him through 4 decades and witnessed his dedication, his discipline, his drive, his intellect, and his high-end ideals. And to me, he's symbolic of the men and the women in the aerospace industry that answer that call and are the best of the best. And, you know, I remember after he got done from one of his shuttle missions, I said, what was it like up there in space? And he just goes, Crocker, I never wanted to come down. And he just totally loved it. He also said it, any astronaut tells you they don't throw up in outer space right when they get there is a liar. So my third point of connection is I had the honor of being the chairman of the board of trustees at Purdue. And I hosted Neil Armstrong several times. And, you know, you get to be able to ask him questions and all those kind of things. And, you know, such a great hero for all of us. And, you know, what he used to say, you know, if you said, hey, you're a hero, he would just shun that away. And he'd go, you know, I am and forever will be a white sock, pocket protector, nerdy engineer. And I remember sitting at a dinner with him, and the highest award at Purdue is the Neil Armstrong Award. And we were honoring Sully Sullenberger with it. And they've only handed the award out less than a handful of times. And so he gets up on stage, and he goes, he looks down at the table we're at, and he goes, Sully, you know, we have 2 awards that we're in common with. You know, one's obviously the Neil Armstrong Award, and he goes, the second is the people who land in strange places. You know, and that's, you know, that's just a little bit of him. But I think my greatest point of personal connection and pride is that my oldest son is a rocket scientist. He is a spacecraft design engineer at the Jet Propulsion Laboratories at NASA, and he's designing the robot arm for Mars 2020. And I'll never forget going down to JPL the first time I went to go see him. And he's just giddy. He's so excited. He goes, Dad, man, these are the smartest people in the world. These are the greatest engineers in the world. And it's like, oh, man, that's awesome. I go, how many levels is it up to professional track? And he goes, 17. I go, what level are you? He goes, I'm 1. Isn't that great? Nowhere to go but up. I go, I love you. I'm proud of you. Give him a bear hug. So if you get a sense I've got a little space envy, you guessed right. And that's why 5 years ago, I actually bought a ticket on Virgin Galactic because I want to go into outer space. Now, I don't know if the guys at the State Department are going to let the undersecretary, you know, partake in space tourism and cut out for a few weeks. But someday, I'm going to do it. And I can't wait. And I'm also proud to say that space is such a great priority for our president and is reinvigorated with Vice President Pence, who's chairman of the National Space Council. And we've empowered private partners, unleashed America's space industry like never before. And it is now the policy of the United States of America to go back to the moon within 5 years, and from there to Mars and beyond. And just 2 weeks ago at the State Department, along with Commerce, we hosted the first Space Enterprise Summit, where it brought in leaders from all around the world in private industry and governments. And we are hosting here in Washington in October this year's International Astronautical Congress, which is the premier meeting of government, industry, and academic leaders across the space sector. And then also to support these objectives, Secretary Pompeo appointed Major General Charles Bolden as our U.S. science envoy for space. You're going to be seeing him a little bit later on. And Charlie has spent the past year traveling around the globe, and this time, you know, Earth-based. And I asked him, you know, what's he think about, you know, that? He goes, flying commercials overrated. But anyway, and he's just done a great job, and I really thank him for all the work he's done. And finally, I'd like to thank our hosts, the panelists that you're about to see, the astronauts that are here, and anybody involved in the space industry. And many times, you know, there's a call to the country, and it's now. So when we look at the next 50 years, we will get to the moon again, and we will stay. And we will go to Mars and beyond. Many small steps we will make, and many more giant leaps we will take. And as fellow human beings whose hopes are bound not by gravity, but only by our resolve, may God bless the legacy and the memory of our Apollo 11 astronauts, and may God continue to bless the United States of America. I thank you all.
Thank you for your remarks. So now I'm going to share some of the historical context of the role of diplomacy within space flight, space exploration, and the role it plays within Project Apollo. I'm really thrilled to talk to you about this today. This is a topic I've been studying for many years and finishing a book on it, and I feel like today is my research made flesh, so I'm very thrilled to be able to share it with you and give you a little bit more context. So I'll take you back to the spring of 1961. And when Kennedy became president that January, the future of human spaceflight was uncertain. And if anything, the moon looked too costly, too ambitious, and not the right goal for the United States space program. But it would be a difficult spring for the new president with a host of foreign relations challenges. Two are of particular relevance to our conversation today. First, on April 12th, the Soviet Union launched the first human into space, Yuri Gagarin. And while Sputnik, the first artificial satellite that the Soviet Union launched in 1957, Sputnik shocked the world public, Gagarin's flight impressed them. And that was a more serious threat to the United States at that moment. And then, just a few days later, the news broke that Cuban leader Fidel Castro defeated the US-supported invasion of the Bay of Pigs. Kennedy's trusted advisor and speechwriter, Ted Sorensen, called it the worst disaster of a disaster-filled period, to give you a sense of what that spring was like. And Sorensen observed an evolution in Kennedy's thinking after the invasion. What the Bay of Pigs taught Kennedy, he said, was that military ventures were not necessarily going to succeed. Instead, world problems required another approach. It was the 1-2 punch of Gagarin's flight boosting Soviet prestige, followed in quick succession by the loss of US prestige with the Bay of Pigs invasion, that reinforced the notion that soft power had a significant and necessary role to play in US grand strategy at that moment. That same day, President Kennedy asked his Vice President Lyndon Johnson that he wanted an accelerated review of the status of the US space program. This would be followed shortly by a request to find a space program which promises dramatic results in which we could win. And that program would be Project Apollo. A few weeks later, in response, Johnson responded to Kennedy with these words, and I'll read his words because I think they're very revealing. He said, "Other nations, regardless of their appreciation of our idealistic values, will tend to align themselves with a country which they believe will be the world leader. And dramatic accomplishments in space are being increasingly identified as a major indicator of world leadership." So this is a simple formula, and it makes the stakes very evident. Space spectaculars were not simply a sparring match taking place above the Earth's atmosphere. They signaled leadership at a moment when the political landscape of the Earth was shifting, new countries were being born, and power would be won through political alignment, not armed conflict. Kennedy proposed Project Apollo to a joint session of Congress in May of 1961, and I'll let him describe the need for this program in his own words.
Finally, if we are to win the battle that is now going on around the world between freedom and tyranny, the dramatic achievements in space which occurred in recent weeks should have made clear to us all, as did the Sputnik in 1957, the impact of this adventure on the minds of men everywhere who are attempting to make a determination of which road they should take.
So Kennedy's argument for Apollo becomes pretty clear when you read these words or you hear him speak it, and that the impact of spaceflight on the minds of people around the world and its role within larger geopolitical alignment should motivate the country to invest in space exploration at this time. So Project Apollo is an extremely bold undertaking. The United States had a total of 15 minutes of human spaceflight experience at that point. It required the development of brand new technology, brand new techniques, managerial practices, all sorts of things. It was sending humans 240,000 miles to the moon. It would cost at one point over 4% of the federal budget. It was a remarkable investment. And it also initiated a very elaborate public diplomacy campaign around the world throughout the 1960s and the 1970s that focused on spaceflight. And here are a few examples that you can see. It was a program on a grand scale. So as engineers built new hardware and the astronauts trained, the U.S. Information Agency and State Department staff created an extensive range of space-themed exhibits, space capsule tours, radio broadcasts, films, educational programming, pamphlets, books, and the list goes on and on. And then we'll come up to 50 years ago this week, and actually on Saturday, on the evening of July 20th, 1969, as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon, guests gathered at a palatial hotel in the French Riviera for an elaborate gala in honor of the first lunar landing. Live news coverage of the Apollo 11 mission played on a dozen television sets set up through the banquet hall. Patrons dined on a space-themed menu and danced a special dance named after the lunar module. That night, people also danced in the streets of Santiago and Vienna. In Kinshasa, thousands assembled in public squares to listen to radio coverage of the mission as they watched space films projected on large outdoor screens. Hundreds of thousands more met in public squares in Seoul and Montreal, and countless cities and towns throughout the world to witness the lunar landing with others. Venezuelan president had a U.S. diplomat screen space films at the palace for his cabinet and guests and designated the day after the landing a national holiday, as did many leaders around the world. On the other side of the world, both geographically and politically, Romania's communist leader, Nicolae Ceausescu, deviated from his prepared speech to praise the first lunar landing, and he was interrupted periodically by applause from the audience. And as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin took their steps on the moon, power companies throughout the world logged a record-breaking upsurge in energy consumption, brought on by the number of televisions and radios tuned to the broadcast. So as I mentioned, more people followed the first lunar landing than any previous event in history. Estimates suggest that over half the world's population listened to the radio coverage, the television broadcast, or read about it in the newspaper following the flight. In nations such as Japan, upward of 90% of the population watched the coverage of the mission. It really, truly captured the attention of the entire world at that moment. Here are a few examples of people following the flight. So when the Apollo 11 crew splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on July 24th, President Nixon was there to meet them. And from the aircraft carrier, he then departed on what was called his Moonglow tour. And this gave him an opportunity to meet with leaders throughout Southeast Asia, as well as Romanian President Ceausescu, to discuss U.S. foreign policy. And it also gave him an opportunity to start improving relations with China and North Vietnam. And then when he was done with that tour, he asked the Apollo 11 crew to travel the world as his ambassadors. And I have a clip that will show you what that tour was like. Oh, first, sorry, I'll give you a sense of their schedule because I really appreciate the kind of energy that it must have taken to go on this grueling schedule. So over 20 countries in just over a month. They went to every continent.
The returning astronauts are treated as heroes. Their goodwill tour takes them to 24 countries in 45 days. Through it all, astronauts stress that the achievement doesn't just belong to 3 men on a rocket.
All right, and that's a clip from the Smithsonian Channel series Apollo's Moonshot. So when they returned from this trip, President Nixon asked them to report on their experiences, and he thanked them, and he said that his meeting with Ceausescu was worth everything the United States spent on the space program, which was perhaps an overstatement, but does give you a sense of how this program was being evaluated and its important role that it played within U.S. foreign relations at the time. So very shortly, I'm going to start a conversation with Major General Michael Collins, but before that, I'd like to welcome Michelle Gaida, Assistant Secretary of State for Global Public Affairs.
Hello, good evening. I am very pleased to be with all of you here today. I have the very distinct honor of officially welcoming Major General Michael Collins to the George Washington University. 50 years ago, our nation and people all around the world tuned in to watch the first images of Apollo 11 reaching the moon. Michael Collins was on that mission, representing the very best of the United States and of humanity. As much a foreign relations achievement as a technological marvel, Apollo 11 was a historic soft power victory for the United States. The White House, the State Department, NASA, the U.S. Information Agency all worked very closely together to shine a light on Apollo 11 as the American-led global effort that united the world. Voice of America broadcast live coverage of the lunar landing in 36 languages for an audience of roughly 750 million, and another 650 million watched the lunar landing on television. It was the first live global broadcast in history. Clearly, the space diplomacy mission had been successful. As Dr. Muir-Harmony stated when he returned from the moon, Major General Collins and his crew embarked upon a worldwide tour, visiting more than 20 countries in 37 days as true ambassadors of goodwill. They built bridges with international partners that really do continue to this day. After his service with NASA, President Nixon appointed Major General Collins Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs at the State Department to continue his outreach to the world to strengthen our nation and our relationships with global partners. That has left every assistant secretary who followed him, myself included, with some very big boots to fill. I am pleased to say I now hold the same position Major General Collins held at the State Department, and I am so honored and so humbled to follow in his footsteps, albeit here on Earth and not the moon. There was no better spokesperson for our country than Major General Collins. He really represented the best of what we strove for today, then, and still do today. Leadership, innovation, international cooperation, and technological and human advancement. Each time I visit the State Department's press briefing room on the second floor, we have a hallway with photographs of all of our previous spokespeople and assistant secretaries. And whenever I see Major General Collins' photo up there, I stand a little bit taller. And being able to meet him and shake his hand today has really been one of the great opportunities of my life, and my son is going to be very jealous. So on behalf of Secretary Pompeo and the entire U.S. State Department community, I say thank you to Major General Collins. We are enormously proud of the legacy you have left at the Department of State, on Earth, and on the moon. We thank you for your service to our country and our world. It is now my deep honor to welcome Major General Collins to the stage to join Dr. Teasel Muir-Harmony. Thank you.
Wow. Oh, ooh. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I am so thrilled to be able to speak with you about this diplomatic tour and then also your role in U.S. foreign relations more generally. And to start things off, I'd love to hear whether or not when you became an astronaut, if you had an impression of the international significance of the program and if you were aware of your role as an ambassador or a diplomat for the United States.
No, I wasn't an astronaut until I was very late in life. I started out in Rome. I was born in Rome. My father was a military attaché at the embassy. My mother was not employed, but she had a mantra, and it was, diplomacy is the first line of defense. And I don't hear that much anymore, but the more I cogitate on it, the truer and more important it is. So it's an honor for me to be here at the State Department and to see some old friends and some many, many new friends who are doing this important work. And now on to your question. I'm sorry, you want to know what I thought 50 years ago. And the answer is I've forgotten, but help me out just a little bit, okay?
Did you expect that you were going to be an ambassador, that you would have a role in supporting American diplomacy as part of your role as an astronaut?
You know, when I was an active duty astronaut, I was more worried about what was going to happen in the next 2 days. I mean, sometimes it was what was going to happen in the next 15 minutes, but mostly I pushed my horizon way out, perhaps to 2 days. Didn't have a concept of the entire procedure, the national effort. I was very busy with my day-to-day tasks trying to get a spacecraft down the production line and pass all its hurdles, have it come through flawlessly, and learn how to operate it, and those details. So I really wasn't too cognizant of the world going on around me. Now, later on, as you pointed out, after the flight, Neil, Buzz, and I were privileged to make this around-the-world trip. 29 cities, I think. I got that number a little off, but I think there were one or two of them that I wanted to forget. No, I didn't say that, but it was an amazing trip. Wherever we went, I thought people would say, well, you Americans finally did it good. And instead of that, everywhere, people said, we did it. We humans, humanity, finally left this little dinky planet and set foot elsewhere. And I had the feeling that was genuine. It wasn't a contrived response on their part. You could see sort of an upwelling, and the more they thought about it, the more they got into it. Neil Armstrong was our spokesperson, and he was amazingly good at that job. Neil was a taciturn man. He did not want to be in the spotlight. But if you put him in the spotlight, when it got on him, he knew where he was and what he was doing, and he knew exactly what to say. He had done his homework. Well, to back up just as Ted, he was not just an astronaut. He had a breadth of knowledge and a whole panoply of interests, way off from one corner to the other. He was an amateur historian, primarily the history of science, but not entirely. When he got to a particular capital, he had done his homework about that place. He knew some of the local problems, had a feeling for the local kind of ambiance, and he would make a very short, impassioned, but a very short, effective speech. When he was through his 5 or 10 minutes, those people felt like they were ready just to crawl right on board with us and go on into space. He was remarkable that way. So that was when I first became aware in a small way of some of the ramifications of this thing that we called Apollo 11.
Once you told me a story about a toast that Neil Armstrong gave in mentioning Tesla.
I'm sorry,
in Belgrade. You once told me a story,
Belgrade.
Yes, about
Yugoslavia.
Yes, yeah, and yeah. I was wondering if you could share that with the audience.
Of course, the man, the Generalissimo, I think he was called, Marshal Tito, ran Yugoslavia with, if not an iron hand, but close to it. And he hosted a formal dinner for us one night, and his wife was, in her own way, well-known, Madame Bross. And as the small talk got smaller and smaller, things kind of slowed down, and I could see Madame Bross totally frozen. She had picked out a speck maybe on the Pitcairn Islands, and she was looking at it with all the intensity of, well, I'm not quite sure of what, but of one of those monoliths that look out to sea that they keep on South Sea Islands. She was doing a good duplicate of that duplication, and so things were not well at this formal dinner. And about that time, I saw Neil get up out of his chair, and he went over and bent over and started chatting with her, just about the distance from here to there. And all of a sudden, she brightened up, big smile, and Marshal Tito noticed, and that changed the entire complexion. From then on, we were all big buddies. Next day, I cornered Neil, and I said, geez, Neil, that was kind of odd. What the heck were you doing talking to her about? I heard you were talking about electricity and the invention of the bulb. And he came right back and said, yes, well, her ancestor was one of the first Nikolai Nikolai light bulb. What's the liquid?
Tesla.
Tesla. Yes. Oh, the reason I've erased Tesla from my memory is Tesla's too much today. So, so anyway, Neil says, "Oh, Nikolai Tesla. Well, yes, she's related to him." But that was nothing that had been in our briefing. It was something that Neil had produced on his own. Very well received, and that was the way it was all the way around the world.
Are there any other meetings with foreign leaders that stand out in your memory? I know you attended the Shah of Iran's birthday party, and you met with the Pope and
the Queen of England too.
The Queen of England, yes.
Oh my gosh, yeah. The Queen of England and her husband, Prince Philip, I believe. And that was very, well, there were a couple of reasons. First was we got a briefing, and we were told, you must never turn your back on the Queen or the Prince. Now, don't worry about it. They're very practiced in this sort of an arena, and they won't make any awkward moments. Well, we had to ascend the staircase, and 3 steps into it, there went the Queen, and there went the Prince, and you know, you couldn't not turn your back on somebody. I got over in the Prince's side, and God, I really liked him. I really admired him. I mean, with all the pomp and circumstance of England, Great Britain, London, the whole bit and caboodle of it, there he stood with great dignity and a frayed collar. Now that's my kind of person. I love him. Sorry.
No, perfect. So I read that in your conversation with Queen Elizabeth, you mentioned to her that you wish you could bring leaders around the world into space and to see the Earth from that perspective, to see that there aren't political boundaries, and also get the sense that the Earth should be protected. And I was wondering if you have a sense of why is it so difficult for people to get that optic, to see the Earth from space without actually going there, or what needs to be communicated about that experience of seeing Earth from that perspective?
Well, I think the thing that's impressive about flying from here to the moon is the close-up look you get of the moon and the far-away view you get from of the Earth, from the Earth. The moon thing. On our way to the moon, we had heat problems because of the constant sunlight upon us. So we had to rotate our spacecraft to keep the heat evenly distributed so this didn't boil and this froze. As a consequence, we didn't get to see the moon until we were just practically at the end of our trip to it. And when we rolled out and looked at it, oh, it was an awesome sphere. It really was. Bulbous. It looked like it was almost trying to climb into the cockpit with us. The sun was behind it, so it was illuminated by a rim of gold, which made the strangest appearances of the craters and the crater pits, the contrast between the lighter than light and the darker than dark. And so as magnificent as that was, and as impressive, and as much as I will remember that was nothing compared to this other window. And out there's this little pea about the size of your thumbnail at arm's length, blue, white, very shiny. You get the blue of the ocean, the white of the water. There's a streak of rust that we call continents. It was such a beautiful, gorgeous, tiny thing nestled into this black velvet of the rest of the universe. And of the two, that was, to me, the whole show and what I will remember. And I think in terms of what other people may see, think, or remember, different ways of looking at it, but I remember one day I said to Mission Control, hey, Houston, I've got the world in my window. I was trying to tell them which way I was pointed, but at the same time I was mesmerized. I had the world in this great big window, the world in my window. And I don't know why, I knew it was made of rock primarily, third rock out. But beyond that, it projected a feeling of fragility. Why? I don't know. I didn't know then, and I don't know now. But on the trip back, I got thinking about that, and lo and behold, that's a very accurate word. If you're limited to one word about what is the Earth like, the Earth is fragile. And I saw that when I had the world in my window. Somehow, that fragility got its way to the forefront, and I remembered it more than some of the other beautiful aspects of it. And as you think about our planet here, the planet Earth, fragility is paramount in many, many ways. It's a very important idea that we are on a fragile surface doing things to this fragile surface. Now, that was the world in my window, but that's not an exclusive view or point of view. You all can have the world in your window if you want. I mean, look at what you see when you think of the world. You think about putting your vision out through a pane of a spacecraft glass, perhaps. But the point is, you see this little thing. You see it in its entirety. You understand walking on it daily. Is it fragile? Oh, Lordy, Lordy, yes. Can some of those manifestations of fragility be corrected? Yes, they can if we put our mind to it. So, world in my window, that's an important concept to me, and I hope it can become one to you as well. Thank you. Thank you.
So you trained with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin for a number of years, and you traveled to the moon with them. Was there anything you learned about your crewmates on the diplomatic tour that sort of surprised you or seemed new? Or did you already know them so well?
Well, on our round-the-world trip, Buzz was good. He was okay. I was, yeah, all right. Neil was really, really good. As I say, Neil was very intelligent. He had the ability to see a situation, to understand not the American point of view, but the Guatemalan point of view, let's say, for example. And he'd done his homework, and he was our spokesperson, and he would make a short speech and just have the locals saying, as we found everywhere, we did it. We humans finally left this planet, not you Americans did it.
And what is the significance of that sense of we, or that sense around the world that it was something that humankind did in terms of U.S. foreign relations or the relationship between the United States and the world?
Well, I think the United States has to be a power in the world, but a very friendly power, and not an overbearing power, and not a power that tries to be dominant. I thought, well, that's State Department talk, and it's true. So where was I about power and and the various aspects of that? I think when I saw the United States flag, the American flag, planted on the moon by Neil and Buzz, I was thrilled, and I was very proud to be a citizen of the United States of America. And I continue to be very proud to be a citizen of the USA. On the other hand, that trip around the world kind of opened my vista a little bit. yes, I wouldn't swap the U.S. for any other place, but I think when we're in the business of foreign policy, the technology that goes into a foreign policy, the use of that technology, how it manifests itself, and how we treat other countries, I think it's important that we try not to be, I don't mind being the leader, but not the dominant leader, and I think we ought to go bend over backwards to have a unified, worldwide approach to the things that we are trying to do in space. It may slow us down a little bit in some cases, but I'm not sure speed is the paramount goal. I think getting the job done, getting it done by all inhabitants or all able inhabitants of the globe is more important. Yeah. Thank you.
And I have one more question, and then we'll invite the rest of the panel out. But I would like you to say a little bit about why you decided to become Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs after you were an astronaut, and a bit about that decision and what you did at the State Department.
Well, when I left NASA, I wanted what I, in my mind, thought about with a clean break. I didn't want to stay within the space program because I felt like it's be kind of a anticlimax or a little bit of a demotion. So I wanted, I wanted to just have that be part of my past. Again, maybe I go back to my my heritage, my mother, my father. My father was not a professional diplomat, but his tour in Rome as a defense attaché, I carried things like that with me, and I decided to do something totally different. And at that time, I was in and out of Washington, D.C., and one time Neil Buzz and I were fortunate enough to make speeches to the joint session of Congress, and Bill Rogers, William P. Rogers, as Secretary of State at the time, apparently liked the speech that I made, and he started talking to people here and there, including the President Nixon. And the next thing I know, I was offered this job as Assistant Secretary here, Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs, which was really strange. I mean, my knowledge of public affairs was just about zilch. But I liked the time that I spent here. I found that the Foreign Service officers are, I don't know how it is today, but they used to be much maligned. You know, they went to cocktail parties and stuff, and that was about it. I had a different take on it. I thought at that time the Foreign Service exam was the most difficult exam, entrance exam, that the government applied to any of the departments and any of the other services, whatever you have. Toughest one was the Foreign Service exam. People who came into the Foreign Service, I thought, were very bright, motivated, hardworking, all the good words that you want to pile on someone that you really admire, and I really did admire them. Now, I left fairly quickly, and it wasn't really that I was tired of my job. It was rather there were a couple of factors. One was that I was offered another job equally intriguing, and that was to be the director of a new Air and Space Museum, which did not exist. But if we got the money appropriated, we were going to dig a hole on the mall and fill it up with a beautiful museum, which eventually did happen. And the other thing was, I thought, you know, I didn't feel I was really pulling my weight at the State Department. And the object diplomacy, being the end result, I wasn't so good at things that I couldn't touch, you know. How fast can diplomacy go? How high can it go? You know? So I thought it was perhaps time for me to move on when I was offered this other job to be director of the National Air and Space Museum, a part of the Smithsonian. Another important factor was that growing up here as a kid, I loved the Smithsonian. I used to spend hours watching nothing. I mean, watching seashells. Big ones, slightly smaller ones, medium-sized, little baby seashells. There'd be like 46 seashells, and I would stand there as a 10-year-old and be mesmerized by how do they look so all the same? No, they're all look different, and so forth. You know, that took me away. So I left state and joined the Smithsonian, and I stayed at the Smithsonian for longer than I worked for NASA, about 6 years. At the, you know, our mantra at NASA when I was there was a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and then I had a similar mantra at the State Department. It was museum on the mall by the bicentennial, and so that was our deadline. And lo and behold, we opened on July, not 4th, but July 1st of our 200th year. So I enjoyed that time as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
So now I'm going to welcome out the other panelists to join you. I'm going to welcome the other panelists to join you. So
certainly.
You can just remain comfortable there, and I'll welcome them on stage. And you can come and take your seats.
Hello, John. How are you? Good to see you. Hello.
So this
Charlie,
good to see you.
Yeah, this conversation will be moderated by Dr. John Logsdon. He founded the Space Policy Institute and is an emeritus professor at George Washington University.
You may be my interpreter.
Joining him are Major General Charles Bolden, sorry, U.S. Science Envoy for Space and former NASA Administrator, and Space Shuttle Commander as well as Dr. Ellen Stofan, the John and Adrienne Mars Director of the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum.
Mike, I'm going to let you sit back and catch your breath a little bit and start with the other two people here. So first I'm going to show off my socks. I've just gotten back from the celebrations at the Kennedy Space Center, where this was one of the door prizes for one of the dinners. Who else has Saturn V on their socks?
I see.
Which probably up in the back you can't see. Let me start with you, Charlie. You've recently completed a term of duty as the State Department's Science Envoy for Space. What does that mean? What did you do?
I asked the same thing when I was invited to do that. I said, in fact, I want to thank Cedar Farrell. She is here somewhere, so before I forget it, but Cedar Farrell is a career professional State Department person, and she was my planner, my guide, my everything. The two of us traipsed around the world. But I said, you all do realize I'm not a scientist? They said, yes. I said, and I'm not really an engineer? They said, yes. I said, so why am I being asked to become the State Department Science Envoy? And they said, well, we want to make you the envoy for space, and you're the only guy we could find. But all kidding aside, I was actually brought aboard to spend a year, along with several other people. I think there were 6 of us this year who went abroad to talk about our particular fields of expertise, mine being space. We picked 4 regions of the world, 8 different countries that we visited in 10 months. And I had a 3-pronged message, and it was the U.S. is still considered, we still consider ourselves to be the leaders in science and technology and anything else you can imagine. But as Mike alluded, we need you. We really need partners. We are open for business, and we want as many of you to become a part of what we're doing. We want you to be a part of the family of spacefaring nations, if at all possible. And the other thing was, you know, if there are students who want to come to our country to see how we live that may change the way that you think about government and governance, we really welcome that. And we visited with students, national leaders, people in government. If they had a space agency, visited with them. If not, science ministers, and then industry. And it was a tremendous time. I came away unbelievably inspired and motivated, to be quite honest, by the enthusiasm.
Is the program continuing?
The program, we hope, will continue. It actually started in the, I probably shouldn't say this, but it started in the Obama administration, and it continues. And it is a tremendous program that the State Department runs.
Ellen, your Mike successor, how many times removed? 4 times removed?
I think about. Yeah, I'm not so sure how many were between you and I.
I don't know.
Noel Henners, Walt Boyne.
Yeah, Noel Henners,
Yeah. Martin Harwood.
And Martin Harwood. Anyway.
And Jack Daly.
And you're in the midst of
long list of men.
Indeed. And now. So lots of the visitors to your museum are not U.S. citizens. They come from all over the world. Do you view the museum as an instrument of diplomacy? And if so, how do you do it?
You know, I really do, because as Charlie was saying and as Mike was saying, space is something that provides international inspiration. And when I look out and think about the struggles we face as a global community, things like climate change, to me that space is an inspiration to the next generation of innovators and explorers that crosses boundaries. And so our visitors do come from all over the world. We try to have exhibits that talk about that international cooperation in space like we do every day up on the International Space Station. And we really want to get that message across. We started with competition in Apollo. We've ended up really being an international space community, from how we do science to how we do exploration. And I think that's an important message to get across to our visitors. And again, to me, it's about inspiring. We're going to have a gallery in the renovated museum called One World Connected that, on a different sort of theme, talks about how observing our planet from space and the fact that we can travel with aircraft all around the planet has really changed our view of our own planet.
Great, great. Teasel, in her introduction, quoted a memo that went to John Kennedy on May the 8th, 1961, which led to the decision to go to the moon. And I want to quote it also. The memo said, "It is men, not merely machines," didn't say women, "it is men, not merely machines, that captures the imagination of the world." As we look towards space diplomacy now, is it still human spaceflight that has a special role? You have programs for, I know that a lot of the developing countries, Surveyor, programs like that are built around robotic programs and their use. We have kind of animated rovers on Mars. I mean, does it have to be humans still to really have impact?
Is that a question for all of us?
That's a question for all of us.
It does not have to be humans. Humans are necessary, I think, because as I tell kids everywhere I go, machines are really good. Computers are really good. Robots are phenomenal. But today, robots can't reason. And robots can't look at a piece of rock that Mike may have picked up to bring back and say, they didn't tell me to get that, but I'm going to take that back because it looks interesting. I point out to people that what has held the imagination of the world between the time that we closed out the shuttle program, although humans have still been orbiting Earth for 18 years now on the International Space Station, most people of importance don't realize that. Everybody knows about Curiosity. The world was, I mean, Times Square, you name it, everybody was there when Curiosity landed. Everybody is aware of New Horizons going past Pluto. So robots have a very important role in capturing the imagination and helping young people mainly understand that they don't have to be an astronaut. They can contribute and they can bring the world together by working with robotic operations or airplanes or science.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, you mentioned Surveyor, probably a lot of people in this audience don't know what Surveyor is, and it was Charlie and our favorite program at NASA, where NASA partners with the U.S. Agency for International Development. There's offices around the world where we work with local communities to work on problems like climate resilience, to say, how can you, in your country, help solve your problems, whether it's around agriculture, drought, too much rain? How can you use this abundant NASA Earth science data to help address and make your country more resilient? It's an amazing program that I think is a huge demonstration of the importance of space diplomacy.
Mike, I know you were recently at the Paris Air Show.
No, I missed the Paris Air Show.
Oh,
yeah.
You didn't get to Europe at all?
No, I missed that.
I was under mishap. Too bad.
Sorry about that.
Anytime you don't get to go to Paris, it's a loss.
Oh, that's true. That is certainly true. But I like your question about people versus the robots. I mean, like, it'll be really exciting when we can put some robots up on Mars, won't it be exciting? We've already done it, right? Okay, I don't hear. Now, when you put Joe Blow and Jane Doe up on Mars, then I think you'll see true excitement. Now, that may not be, yeah. You know, that may not be the way the world should be. Charlie points out things that are of more importance than whether it's a machine or whether it's a human being. They each have their place. But the public, I do think, has a special little corner in the back of their brain reserved for people who go to these places. And I don't think that'll change.
I mean, you see the reaction you still get 50 years later for having been part of the grand adventure of Apollo 11. In my feeling, it's still something special. There are only 570 humans that have been in orbit, so there is something there that maintains potency. It's sending a message. This is a panel on or event on space diplomacy. Have we defined space diplomacy? You just did it, Charlie. What would you say it is?
I think any kind of diplomacy is going out and trying to reach as many people as you can and give them a message of hope, to give them a message of importance, but to let them know what is available to them, to inform them of what kinds of things they can do. And I find in working with kids, you can't inspire a kid if they're not informed. When I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, and I tell people all the time, I grew up thinking that the only engineer I knew was the person in the front end of a train. Right. And but that was my culture, my society, and I later learned what other engineers were that made things, that took science and turned it into things. So I think diplomacy is helping to inform and then to inspire once we've done that.
But it's also advancing the interests of this country.
It is.
So how do you shape that message? You said it at the start, kind of.
No,
U.S. is still the country.
The thing you've got to, if you don't believe that your country is the leader, is the greatest country in the world, then you probably shouldn't go out to try to be a diplomat. I happen to believe that. I spent 34 years of my life as an active duty Marine, and I tell people today, I now understand the value of soft power. And that's what institutions like the Department of Defense, like the State Department, like NASA. I tell people all the time, I think NASA is probably this country's greatest soft power tool, because we have a way, through things like Mike talked about, like people who have done things that attract the interest of the world and make them want to be like us. And that, when I said I was inspired and motivated as I went through this 10-month tenure, I was inspired because in spite of everything that's going on here, first thing people ask is, what the hell are you all doing? And then they say, but we want to be like you. You know, how do we get to the U.S.? How do we get to be a part of NASA? And trying to explain to them that you don't have to be a part of NASA. You can have your own space program, and then you can collaborate with NASA, or you can cooperate with NASA. But the biggest thing is to tell them we are here to help, but we want you to do things on your own, and we want you to join the family of spacefaring nations as soon as you can.
Great. Mike at the start, Ellen now. you ran an institution called National Air and Space Museum. How do you put the national in the message in the design of the museum? Or was it self-evident?
Well, we tried as hard as we could. We had, I forgot how many square feet of floor space divided into so many, and cubic galleries, and they all, I won't say all, but almost all of them had some international importance, as do the Marines. As Charlie, I think the Marines have got a big job in diplomacy, more than the other services. They get out and around.
Thank you. I'll accept that.
And they can do good work.
My son is out there somewhere, and he'll agree with you.
Okay. But no, in putting the Air and Space Museum together, if I understood your question correctly, we tried not to overemphasize, but to emphasize certainly the international things. We had aircraft in there built by de Havilland and so on, and we did the best we could to even out the
But you're
historical.
still celebrating American accomplishment. You know, it's a museum to honor what the United States has done.
Yeah, it's the National Air and Space Museum, and not the World Air and Space Museum.
Well, just like with Apollo, we hold that collection, but I don't think of it as holding it just for the nation. We hold the Apollo collection for the world, and we loan artifacts out to museums around the world. And to me, a big part of it is this inspiration piece again. We're trying to inspire the next generation, and we do it through telling this American story of aviation and space.
Yeah. With the hope that other countries will be impressed and want to join that leadership crowd.
Yeah, it's inspiration, again, because a kid, you know, what more inspires a kid than meeting an astronaut, than thinking about maybe I could invent something that would hang in this museum someday. And I think it's that awe-inspired look on a kid's face when they walk into the museum and look up at Chuck Yeager's plane and the lunar module and think, this is a story I want to be a part of. And those kids come from all around the world.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great things about the museum is the icons of American achievement that all can see and all can share. I wrote an article recently about the skilled word crafting of the message that Neil and Buzz left on the moon. We came in peace for all mankind. Sure. And I think that's still the message. Sure. What about explicitly STEM-related diplomacy? Could this country be doing more to stimulate science, technical, engineering, mathematics education around the world, or should we focus on our priorities at home first?
In many ways, I think we do better around the world than we're doing here at home, and we need to focus more on getting our kids interested in STEAM-related topics.
Right.
Science, technology, engineering, the arts, math, and even design. But I will give kudos to members of the State Department. One of the things that impressed me in my travels was with things like the American Corner and different ideas that State Department employees have used to attract students who don't have computers, don't have access to the internet, and make it possible for them to be able to come into a place like in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where it's packed. Because they now can join the rest of the nations of the world by using capabilities that are there in the American Corner. So I would love to see us emulate that here in the United States, where we go into some areas that are less fortunate than others and may not have access to the and I know people say, but everywhere in the world has an internet. That's not true, not even here in the US. So we could do a much better job of getting our kids in less developed parts of the world, of the country, informed and then engaged and inspired to do the kind of stuff to be a Buzz Aldrin or a Mike Collins or a Neil Armstrong or an Ellen Stofan.
Well, and I would just add, when I traveled a lot around the world when I was at NASA, and what really struck me is inspiring kids in countries around the world to go into STEM fields is going to help those countries in the long run. It's going to help them build their economies. It's going to help them be more resilient to climate change. And stronger countries around the world make it easier for the United States. And so to me, it's a win-win.
Mike, as you look back at Apollo 11 in 50 years, what do you think was the biggest international legacy of the mission?
Well, I would guess that it's somewhere in the world of vision. And I usually say that you want to get away from Earth some distance. I don't know, the moon is, I think, 236,000 miles away. I don't think you have to get, maybe 100,000, would that be all right? Is that okay? And if you could get the political leaders of the world out at that distance and let them look back at their home, you know, hell, they can't even find their country. There's no borders. So if you have a border dispute, well, you have to do something else about it. Right. I mean, you can't fight about it. And the idea of this tiny little fragile again thing, and I'm hoping they're going to look at the world in my window and find that it's fragile. When you get these guys talking to each other, I think you're going to come out with some very surprising conclusions about antipathies, particularly as manifested by borders and individual countries. I think those individual countries will become less important, and the totality of all, however many of them there are, 139 or something, and that's what I hope is the legacy of Apollo, is a view from afar. Thank you.
Charlie, Ellen, we have some closing remarks because we have one more piece of the program that wasn't announced yet.
I will close with just one comment. It's kind of using what Mike just talked about. He's one of a few people who ever saw our planet from that vantage point where you see the blue marble. And I was asked earlier about what do I think is the most iconic image from the Apollo program. I think the questioner was expecting I was going to say something about, you know, Buzz or Neil coming down the ladder or something from Apollo 11, and I said that's a no-brainer. It's you know, it's Earthrise from Apollo 8. That to me is the most iconic photo of for humanity, because it shows our planet as one. With no borders, no boundaries, and it gives us the sense of responsibility for preserving that planet the way that they saw it back then.
Yeah, as Bill Anders, who took the photo, says, we came all the way to the moon to discover the Earth. That's right.
I was the Capcom for Apollo 8, and of course then flew on 11, and I can recall this was the first flight to exceed escape velocity. This was the first time humans were actually leaving their planet and going elsewhere. Apollo 8, in my mind, was of extraordinary importance. It was about leaving. Now, Apollo 11 was about arriving. Okay, 100 years from now, you put these historians like John would have a symposium, a 9-day symposium, to figure out whether which of those two is more important, leaving or arriving. And you know, the older I get, the more I get tilted toward Apollo 8 rather than Apollo 11. I think the concept of outward bound, I think was Alfred Lord Tennyson, in poems, he worked that phrase in, and that's always rung a bell with me, outward bound. And Apollo 8 was the epitome of that, past escape velocity, off you go. So I agree with what you're saying about 8.
I'm just going to close with an advertisement, because that was so beautiful. For probably some in this audience who were too young to be around for Apollo, we are trying to recreate it for you on the National Mall. So if you haven't had a chance yet, please come out after 9:30 tonight through Saturday night and take a look at the Saturn V rocket on the Washington Monument. It is beautiful. It is awe-inspiring. I cried when I first saw it.
But you cry all the time.
I cry all the time. he knows me.
We got two criers.
Two criers.
Me too, a little bit. Okay, great. Let me release the panel.
Yes, we have a special guest, a surprise guest for all of you. And
so
we should go.
I'll let John release the panel first.
Off we go.
Stayed and you took your seat.
Okay.
So
Can't hear words.
No, I already said
I'm supposed to do something. Push me in that direction.
Thank you. Sorry, we got switched.
So we have made this program a little flexible at the end. There's a gentleman here who has some ideas about the next steps in space diplomacy. So let me bring him on stage. He's back there schmoozing. Sir? I don't think he needs an introduction. You want to work from here? No. So, Buzz, you are working on some ideas for a next stage in space diplomacy, and we thought it was an appropriate way to end the program for you to present those ideas in a few minutes. We got to be out here at 6:30, so you're. My job is to
get me out of here.
Get you out of here.
Yeah,
but go.
Well, I missed the plane in Huntsville coming up here. So we had to get a private jet. And
that's
we're
why
still
you go.
a little late.
Okay.
But when I'm drawn to the stars,
right.
I'll find any way to get there.
And the ability to
I
talk
haven't
to
seen Mike
people.
in a long time.
Yeah. So you have this idea for a strategic space alliance.
Well, yes, because to go way back, and I'm sure Mike talked a little bit about this, but Neil's words of a small step, a giant leap. I think a number of us are still waiting for that giant leap. But when we were out of quarantine after we came back, Air Force One, at least we called it that, picked us up and flew from New York, Mayor Lindsay, a parade to Chicago, Mayor Daley, parade in Century Plaza in LA, state dinner. And Mike keeps asking me what this is, and I have to tell him because he has one too. It's a Presidential Medal of Freedom. Very, very top door. But now what happened after that? Well, we changed clothes. Air Force One picked us up again. Now we went around the world. Houston to Bogota, Colombia. Argentina.
If your name ever stops, won't get
I
out
won't.
of it.
Brazil, Madrid, London, Paris, India, Thailand, Tokyo, Seoul, Australia, and then back. And I thought, when we came back, we had clippings in a big, fat notebook. And it was called Giant Step. And we all thought that was pretty appropriate. Coming back from doing things way out there, we felt that our trip around the world was logically giant step. Well, you know, we went through the Apollo Skylab, Apollo Soyuz, the shuttle, the station, and international ventures like that. And then it was Constellation, go back to the moon, Journey to Mars. Neither of them quite gelled. They didn't quite make it. And so now I think, and I think the public would like to know, what is the next step space alliance? This is not just NASA, just the US. We have an alliance of nations that need to venture out on this next step space. And they're not just space agencies. But if NASA were to try and bring together the commercial guys, the ones that love government money, it would have to be with maybe the Aerospace Corporation as an overall advisor to NASA. You remember Belcom was right. in Apollo? And nobody is right now, except Congress. So if NASA and ESA and Russia, JAXA, China, United Launch Alliance, SpaceX, and Blue Origin. Now, these are all capable agencies, entities that can carry out future space. And to that list, we may add India, combination of Saudi Emirates, maybe, Australia, possibly the Koreas. So this next step space alliance can be a rallying point for not just return to the moon or reestablishing a presence, a permanent presence on the moon in a way that logically builds forward to Mars, because we make it happen that way. We look at what we might want to do at Mars, and then I think we'll do that at the moon. Little detail is that there's ice crystals at the moon, and with a little power, nuclear reactor maybe, we get water, and water we can separate into oxygen, hydrogen fuel. Why is everybody focused at Mars on methane? Just because there are a bunch of global warming guys that want to use up the CO2 in the atmosphere on Mars? Think that's the reason? Look, if the best fuel, oxygen and hydrogen, high performance, works at the moon, we should work that at Mars.
Well,
yeah, no, I analyze things too deeply.
I know you do.
Yeah.
You also wear a lot of watches, and so I can see what time it is. And we're supposed to be done in 2 minutes.
Uh-oh. They're the first 3 elements of the gateway. If we got those as a team and then picked a team, we could use those in low Earth orbit, or they could become a part of a transcraft for an adaptation of gateway, transway. Transway goes from low Earth orbit to lunar orbit and back again. It reuses things, but nothing stays in lunar orbit, and nothing stays in Earth orbit. Sure, there's a space station, one that's getting older and older.
Like us.
Costs a lot, yeah. And what we need to do is to form ISS laboratories in low Earth orbit.
Good.
With the elements of the gateway. Now, here's where diplomacy comes in.
Okay.
What is China going to do about this?
Well, that's the subject for the next discussion. Let's thank Buzz for the efforts he made to get here, but let's honor our sponsors and stick to the timeline.
You got it.
Bring Teasel on and let's us exit stage left. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. That concludes our program. Thank you so much for coming. I would like to take just some last moments to thank my co-organizers. They've been an extraordinary partners in this process. So the Smithsonian teamed up with the U.S. State Department and especially the U.S. Diplomacy Center, as well as George Washington University's Space Policy Institute. And so I'd like to thank all my colleagues. They're too numerous to name, but thank you for all your contributions. And I'd like to reiterate that we will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 over the next few days. Please join us on the Mall. There are events inside the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum and out on the Mall. Hopefully you'll get to participate in them as well. Thank you so much for coming and enjoy your evening.
And now you're watching American History.